at the shape of a building and how it actually influences the project. So this is just for background, and this is very useful whenever you do your task 1. So we've got 2 shapes that we're going to look at. So the first one is a square shape of 40 by 40 meters, and we could calculate, okay, that the total square meter area is 1,600 squares. The wall length is 160 meters. The wall height is 3 meters. The wall area is thus 480 squares. And then you've got your floor ratio of 480 squares over 1,600 squares. And you could calculate that the cost of the external facade in terms of the rand per square meter of the floor area based on this. So it works out at roughly 30% of your cost. So looking at the second scenario, you've got your 100 by 16 meters, which is the same area if you calculate it. So your area is the same. Your wall length is now 232 meters. Your height still stays the same, and then your wall area now goes up to 696 squares. If you divide that by your floor area, you get to a cost of rand per square meter, the ratio of 43.5%. So you can see the ratio is higher. But let's look at it in a practical way. If you look at it in practical terms, the rate per square meter on plan of a facade costing 800 Rand on elevation, if you calculate that, will work out as follows. So you've got 800 Rand per square meter times 50% for your cost ratio. So it works out 240 Rand per square meter for your just for your external envelope or your walls per square meter. This now excludes any installation like tiling or so, because your tiling will be the same. It doesn't really change, the rate and the area won't influence it too much. But then looking at case B, where your ratio is 43.5%, it will work out 348 Rand per square meter. So you can see how the shape immediately had an influence on the cost of your external facade. It doesn't necessarily have an influence on the rest. Obviously, the more windows you put on, the higher the cost. And the square building one and the rectangular one might have the same amount of windows or openings, which will not necessarily have an influence on the cost. So just be mindful of that. And so okay, then there's some explanation in the AECOM book, if you go through it, why if you really look at it, a round shape building will have a better cost ratio of a rectangular or a square building. But if you go and look at the technicality of it, to build a round wall has more technicality to it, which raises the cost again. So this is the experience that we're talking about whenever a cost estimator looks at a design. What rate should he use for the external envelope? So this is the items that he usually looks at. Is it what type of brick is used? Is it a very expensive brick? Is it going to be plastered? Is it round? Is it a funny shape? Is it something unconventional? Will the contractor actually be able to do that? So those are the things that you consider whenever you build up your rates and whenever you do your cost estimation. Then the other thing that I'm just going to highlight a few things that you can also look at. Your floor to ceiling height also has an influence, or your square meter rate might not always be relevant to a new building, because some buildings may have a double volume type of installation. Your floor to ceiling height might be lower or higher, which will influence the cost, etc., etc. So it's just a discussion on that. And then your plumbing and mechanical electrical installations will have a big influence on your rate per square meter. So you need to have a look at that, and I think I've touched on it, whereas a toilet block installation will have a lot more technical plumbing installed, which will take the rate per square meter up. So for instance, when you do your task and you do your rate calculation, you need to consider your historical building that you're basing your square meter rate on. How many bathrooms did that building have, and how much does your new one have? Will that influence the cost? If you looking at two three-bedroom houses, but the one has en suites for the one and the other one only has one bathroom, obviously that will have an influence on the cost. Then similarly, the commercial and industrial developments, there's a big difference between developing a nuclear plant in comparison to a normal house that you're building. The cost, that's the two extremes almost, if you want to call it that. So obviously industrial development will might be, if you've got big storerooms, it might be cheaper, but if you need to refrigerate that stores or put in air conditioning for that volume, it may take up the cost quite a bit. So those are the things that you need to look at. Then your construction areas, the rate per square meter of a building with large balconies, access corridors, including the construction area, cannot be compared with a rate per square meter of a building without similar installations. So you just need to remember that. Internal divisions, subdivisions, your internal walls. If you've got an open office development, you can't compare that rate with a new development with a lot of individual offices built into it. Obviously, you have more brickwork, you have more paintwork, more aircons that you have to put in, less centralized installations, etc. So those are the other things that you need to look at. But the rate per square meter on plan of a facade costing 800 square meters on elevation, each cost is... Okay, so this is just a slide that I have to delete. Okay, then we get to our next section, parking, and then considerations of that. So this is something that you need to look at as well. We've got two scenarios. We've got one building with a basement, and then we've got another building with external parking. So the floor areas is exactly the same for your offices. So your offices is 600 square meters, and then for this building it's exactly the same, but your parking is now outside. Same area of parking that you use. So you've got 2,400 squares of building, and you've got 3,000 square meters worth of building. Now I'm going to get into the detail just now. So then we look at two perimeters. So for scenario one or case one, you've got 2,400 square meters times a rate of 15,000 Rand per square meter. So it's 36 million for this office building. Your basement parking is less because it doesn't have specialist installations, and it works out at approximately 6,000 Rand per square meter. And then you add up your cost to get to 39.6 million. So your rate per square meter works out at 13,200 Rand per square meter for case one. Now look, if we look at case B, we've got the same amount of office space at the same rate. So it's still 36,000. 36 million that it works out on. And then you've got your parking, which is now external, but it's external, so it's only works out at 800 Rand per square meter, and you get to 36 let's say 5 million. Okay, so that's more or less what it works out at. But remember now your rate per square meter is now divided by 2,400 square meters and not the total 3,000 square meters. So your rate per square meter works out higher because you're working with your building's square meter rate and not your parking. Okay. So these are the things that you need to look out for when doing your estimation, and that's why your external works, in this case, in case B, your external works is your parking, is always calculated separately from your actual building cost, because it influences your building cost quite a bit. So those are very important concepts when considering it for your assignment. And whenever you do any calculations for estimate. Thanks everyone, that's lecture 3, and yeah, I'll see you guys on Monday.